Hi there, my name's Guy, you're watching Midwinter Minis, and welcome to the first episode of the Speed Painting HeroQuest series. In this little collection of videos, I'm going to show you how to quickly and easily paint up all the miniatures and furniture from your HeroQuest set. Now, I know that, especially if you're new to this, painting up 70 plus miniatures may seem a little bit daunting, but don't worry, we're going to do this together, and you're going to have great fun while you're at it. I'm not going to assume any prior knowledge of miniature painting from you, and I'll guide you every step of the way, from paint selection to what brushes to use, and explain techniques as I go. And even if you're already an experienced miniature painter, you may still find this series useful, as my focus will be on getting great results with very simple, effective methods, so you may just learn a trick or two while you're at it. Also, it has to be said, the miniatures that come in HeroQuest have their own unique quirks, which I'll show you how to resolve. The game, originally released as a collaborative effort between MB and Games Workshop in the late 80s, and re-released by Avalon Hill a couple of years ago, is a great gateway into the world of tabletop miniature games. It really nicely bridges the gap between a traditional board game and an immersive tabletop RPG. The game itself is really easy to learn. It's a great way to introduce kids to more sophisticated, less linear board games, and can be played solo or with anywhere up to 5 players. It also has a series of missions which escalate in danger, making it a perfect game to revisit time and time again with a group of gaming buddies. For this series, I'll be using the miniatures from the 2021 Avalon Hill re-release. If you are lucky enough to own one of the 1989 copies, you can still follow along with the painting guide. Some of the details will differ, but the core principles are the same. In this episode, I'll be going through the prep work on the models to get them ready for painting, showing you how to prime them, and showing you the paints and brushes I'll be using for the entire series. Inside the HeroQuest box, you'll find plastic trays to store all the miniatures in the box, which is great if you're not intending to paint them, but once we start painting, you're not really going to want to store them back in these trays. As you'll no doubt have noticed, they fit quite snugly on the models, and popping them in and out over and over again will scrape the paint off. Don't worry though, in a later video I'll show you some fantastic alternative DIY and buyable storage options to keep your painted minis lovely and safe. Anyway, let's take a look at what we're working with here. We've got dozens of furniture pieces and open and closed doors to flesh out the dungeons. There are 2 zombies and 2 mummies, 3 abominations, 4 skeletons, 8 orcs, 4 dread knights, a gargoyle, a dread sorcerer, and 6 goblins. And yeah, I know there's only 5 there, but let me introduce you to Darren. Darren survived 6 rounds of combat against my elf and eventually killed me. To honour the literal weakest enemy in the game killing one of the adventurers, he got a celebratory paint job, but don't worry, I've got 5 other goblins to show you how to paint them. In the base game, there are also 4 adventurers to play as. There's my favourite, the elf, there's the wizard, and there's also the barbarian and the dwarf, but these have already been painted in my set. So what I'll do is I'll use the bonus alternative models which came with the crowd-funded version of the game to demonstrate. There's also some little rat models and skull models, but they're just included as fun extras, they're not essential to the gameplay or anything. You'll probably notice that the material the miniatures themselves are made of feel quite different to the rigid, hard plastic that models from companies like Games Workshop create. They're slightly flexible, a bit bendy, and if your set is anything like mine, you'll have noticed that quite a few of the models have been warped by being stored in the box. This might seem like a little bit of a letdown, but trust me, these make fantastic, very hardy board game pieces, which is essentially what they are. Now, resist the temptation to just bend the warped parts back, as they might snap, but don't worry, we can make them look much, much better. Grab yourself a bowl and a sieve, put the sieve in the bowl, and now fill it up with very hot water. It doesn't have to be boiling, just too hot to touch is perfect. Dunk all of your warped miniatures in one by one into the hot water, leave them for about 20 seconds or so, and then lift up the sieve and plop them out. If you don't have a sieve, just use something like tweezers to retrieve them from the hot water. The plastic will be very malleable while the mini is hot. Some of the models might even just spring back into their intended shape, but if they're still a bit wonky, gently squish them back into the right position with your fingers. Once you're happy with their shape, give them a quick dunk in some cold water and it should lock them into shape. While you've got some warm water out, this is also a good opportunity to give each of the models a gentle scrub with a wet toothbrush to help remove a substance called mold release from the minis. It's often invisible, but forms a thin, oily layer which can stop our paint from sticking really nicely, so a quick scrub now will remove any issues later on. You'll also probably notice a thin line running around the centre of each mini. This is called a mould line, and is the tiny gap between the two halves of the mould they press together to make the miniatures. As these are essentially board game pieces, not display quality models, don't feel obligated to remove them, but if you want your minis to look a little bit cleaner, you can simply give them a gentle scrape with the back of a hobby knife. As this is a softer, less rigid plastic, I would avoid using a sponge file or emery board, as the material gets little tears and abrasions, making the surface look rough. Not ideal, I would just stick with a knife. You might already own something like the Citadel mold line remover. As the name might suggest, this is obviously a perfect use for this tool. Some of the larger pieces of furniture have these little circular divots in them. This is from where they've been removed from the sprues in the factory. Just cut off the excess plastic around the mark and don't worry too much about it. This furniture is supposed to look rustic and ancient. The odd hole, dent or scrape won't look out of place when the set is completely painted. You might also notice that some of the models have got really shiny areas between sections. This is just residual glue from where the models were assembled in the factory, and no cause for concern. Once the models are painted, you won't notice these areas at all. I've been painting minis and playing tabletop games on and off for about 30 years, and let me tell you that prepping models like this is best done idly in the background of doing something relaxing, like watching one of your favourite films or a cosy, familiar TV series, or listening to your favourite music, a really good audiobook, or a podcast. If, as you're tidying up the mould lines, you notice some unsightly white lines appearing, don't worry, that's just stress marks on the plastic. When we start painting, these will all become invisible. Some models, like this female orc, have a mould line that's cleverly hidden along the sharp edges that go all the way around the model. No removal required. Huge thanks to the clever sculptors who help hobbyists get to the fun stuff sooner. You might also notice that, even after reshaping in hot water, some of the models might be a bit wobbly on their bases. No worries, just pop an emery board or nail file down and give them a few runs back and forth. So, here's the HeroQuest minis, all cleaned up. The bases themselves are very, very basic, just entirely flat plastic discs. If you want to leave them like that, you obviously can, but let me show you a really simple way of adding to the immersion and making some rough, ancient flagstone and dirt texture for the base tops. The secret is card. Just boring old, reasonably thin card, like the stuff that cereal boxes are made of. Now, we're not trying to be exact here, so you don't have to measure anything, just grab some scissors and start cutting some strips off. They don't even have to all be the same width. In fact, it's probably best if they're not, but try to keep them all relatively thin. Once you've got several strips, you can then cut those strips at right angles every few millimeters, basically making lots of tiny squares or rectangles of thin card. These are going to be your flagstones. Paint a layer of PVA glue onto the flat surface of your model's base with a regular paintbrush, and then place your flagstones down anywhere you like. The best way to do this, in my opinion, is to press the tip of a hobby knife into the card and lay them in place. The glue will be a stronger bond than the knife tip, and the card will be left behind on the base when you lift the knife away. PVA glue is great for stuff like this. It has a long working time, and you can arrange the card flagstones however you like and leave them to dry. Just don't forget to give the paintbrush you used with the glue a thorough rinse afterwards. I'm leaving my flagstones pretty uneven to match the ancient, run-down vibe of the HeroQuest dungeons. Now, if you want to, you can leave some space bare on the bases, but instead sprinkle a bit of sand onto the PVA glue to make it look like dirt and gravel. If you find your PVA glue is pulling back on itself too much before you get to it, you might want to score some lines into the surface of the base using a hobby knife. Roughing it up a little bit like this will add some texture that the glue will be able to hold onto and anchor the stuff you stick down a bit better. On top of the heroes and the monster models, I'm also going to add some flagstones to the floors of the open doorways to make them thematically match the other minis. After about an hour or so, all of this stuff should be totally dry. At this point, I'd recommend watering down some PVA glue, about half and half with water, and applying this watery glue mix all over the bases. This will help lock everything in place and stop things flaking away in the future. This stage will take a good few hours to dry though, so it's best to do this at the end of the day, letting them dry overnight. In the morning, you'll have a whole bunch of HeroQuest minis ready for the next stage. Now, you might like some of the flagstones to overhang the bases a little, but I like my base rims neat and tidy, so using nippers, I snipped off the excess card, keeping it flush with the edge of the base. Right, looking good. Now let's get these models ready for priming. If you're not familiar, priming is the process of applying a priming paint, which is a highly adhesive type of paint, which will help the regular acrylic model paint we apply later stick to the model much better. As you've seen, the plastic the HeroQuest models are made of is quite shiny, so it might be quite tricky to apply even coats of the paint if we didn't prime it first. And also, if we don't prime, we do run the risk of the paint flaking off the model. Now, to get a really even coverage on the hero and monster models, I'd recommend attaching them to some sort of handle for easy painting. After painting thousands and thousands of minis, I've settled on upturned plastic shot glasses and using blue tack, a kind of poster putty, to temporarily stick the minis in place. It's cheap, easy, and very effective. For this project, I'd recommend getting hold of at least one, but preferably two, spray primers. The essential colour would be grey, as this will create a great neutral starting point for all of the models. The optional second colour would be black, which will be really useful for quickly adding some dark undersides to the character and monster models. Head to a well-ventilated area, ideally outside, and shake up your rattle can for at least 30 seconds. Flip it, spin it, and get that paint inside really agitated and well mixed. If you have a black spray paint, use this first. At a distance of about 20 centimeters, 8 inches away, squeeze the spray nozzle in short bursts while spinning the model around in your hand. For the black stage, we want to aim upwards at the underside of the model, trying to catch all of these shadowy under areas. It doesn't really matter if there's bare plastic visible on the top half. That's because now we're going to use the grey spray. Doing exactly the same thing, short bursts of spray, rotating the model as you go, but this time just aiming downwards, catching all of the top-facing parts of the models. This will give you this kind of result, predominantly grey, but if we look at the undersides, it's much darker, which will help with some of the cheaty paint techniques we use later on. For the furniture, however, I'd recommend just using the grey on everything, no need for black really. Lay all of the furniture pieces down on some scrap card, with about an inch or a couple of centimeters space between each piece to let the paint get into everything from all sides, and make sweeps back and forth, spraying from one side and then moving to the other side, and then do the same motion again. This time you'll be catching a whole different side of the models. Rotate yourself around the models again, and repeat, until you've hit all the models from all four sides. Give them 20 minutes or so to be touch dry, and then flip them all over and repeat the process on the other side. This technique of applying multiple very light thin coats from multiple angles will create a very even, solid coat ready for paint. And here we go. Every single HeroQuest miniature primed and ready for the painting stage. In subsequent videos in this series, I'll show you how to paint each type of monster and each hero in really simple, effective ways that will help you bring the board game to life next time you play and give you a really fun, immersive experience. Now, if you'd like to follow along, here are the materials I'll be using for the painting tutorials. Obviously, we've already covered the grey and black primers, but just a quick note to let you know that any acrylic-based primer will do. This stuff is supposed to be for cars and motorbikes, but it works perfectly well on models too, and it's a fair bit cheaper than the spray cans that most big brand model paint companies make. In terms of paints, we'll be using a small selection of 14 acrylic paints. Long-time viewers of Midwinter Minis will be familiar with this selection from my old Blackstone Fortress series, but I've slightly updated it to suit the dark, dingy tones of the HeroQuest crypts and dungeons. We'll be using a black paint, a medium neutral grey paint, a warm off-white bone colour, a khaki paint, a warm brown, a deep bloody red, a bold yellow, not too pale, a medium green, a very deep dark blue, and a rich purple. I'll also be using two shades, a black wash and a brown wash, as well as two metallic paints, a bright silver, and a rich gold. You may already have some paints that you can use for this, or maybe you just need to add one or two to your collection. The precise paint brands and colours don't have to match exactly. I know that not all paint brands are available everywhere in the world, but to help you choose what to use, I'll leave a list in the video description of the actual paints I use in the videos, as well as similar paints from a few different brands. You'll also need a few paintbrushes to follow along. First, a ruined, old, wide, flat brush. This is going to be used for doing a technique called dry brushing, so flat, soft bristles in a fairly big brush size is what you're after. If you've got any old, big brushes that don't hold a nice tip anymore, feel free to cut the tip off to create a brush like this rather than going out and buying a dedicated dry brush. Cheap makeup brushes also make really good dry brushes if you need to stock up on a budget too. You'll also want a medium-bodied workhorse brush. I'm going to be using a cheap synthetic brush with bristles made of a man-made material called gold Taklon, which has a nice spring and bounce to it. This is a size 3 brush. Now, I know not all paint manufacturers have the same brush size rules, but all you really want is for the bristles to have a big enough body to hold a reasonable amount of paint while you base coat, but a fairly precise point to maintain good accuracy when you're laying your colours down. You're going to be using this brush for about 90% of the painting, so make sure you're happy with it. It doesn't have to be expensive, you can get a whole set of gold Taklon mini painting brushes for about £10. And as I said, I'll leave links to lots of handy things in the description if you need to pick up anything before you begin. Finally, I'd recommend having a detail brush that you can add the finishing touches to your models with. Again, this is just a cheap synthetic brush, but it's a size 00 and has a nice fine tip, even if it's got a pretty weird brand name. Anyway, that's it for the prep. If for some reason you don't own HeroQuest and after all this you think it sounds like it might be a fun thing to try out, whether you want to paint the models along with the series or have a go at the game, I'll leave a link to it in the description. If you buy using the link, we'll get a tiny kickback at no extra cost to you, so it's a nice way to support the channel while doing something that you were maybe going to do anyway. If you found this video useful and you fancy actively supporting the channel, there are a few ways you can. First and foremost, we have a team of absolutely wonderful supporters over on Patreon who, no word of a lie, we wouldn't be here without. You can join them for just £2 a month, and when you do, you get access to our Discord server, you can help shape our content through Patreon-only polls, take part in occasional giveaways, and you get a shout out when you sign up too. Speaking of which, here are the newest Midwinter Minis Patreon supporters. Huge thanks to Grim Dark Briar, 40k Guy, The Real Sean Bean, Ross Grimes, Obtainable Spatula, Wayne Odell, Samuel Winter, Forgotten 332, Jland 445, Jason Hubbs, Joshua Illustrator, Snacks 26, Big Mac Danskull, Chris Fletcher, Carrot's Shiny Sword, Jason, CETX, Lars T, Door Nugget, Joe Seelen, and Chicky Nugs. If you fancy it, you could also check out midwinterminis.com too, where we have a small collection of really cool merch which we personally send out. So that's it for now. In the next installment, I'll be painting up all that awesome furniture. Subscribe so you don't miss it, and maybe hit the like button if you found this video useful, or better still, leave a comment and let me know how you're getting on with HeroQuest and whether or not you'll be following along with the series. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye for now.